The Speed Challenge. The dojo was silent except for the rhythmic sound of students breathing and the faint rustle of Bruce Lee's GI as he moved with feline precision. It was a hot afternoon in Los Angeles, and the Chinese master was demonstrating Jeet Kune Do techniques to a select group of fighters, including Joe Louis, one of the biggest names in American karate at the time. Joe watched carefully, but something in his gaze betrayed an almost arrogant confidence. He was fast, really fast, and he knew it. As Bruce explained the importance of economy of movement, Joe crossed his arms, an almost imperceptible smile on his lips. "I'm faster than you," he thought. It wasn't a provocation, but a certainty he had carried since becoming champion. Bruce, however, seemed to read her thoughts. "Speed isn't just about moving your hands before your opponent," said Bruce, stopping in the middle of the demonstration. "It's anticipating, it's flowing. It's knowing when not to move." Joe raised an eyebrow. "Then show me." Bruce didn't respond right away. Instead, he turned to a nearby table, where there was a coin. He caught it between his fingers and, without warning, threw it into the air. Joe instinctively reached out to catch it, but before his fingers touched it, Bruce had already intercepted the movement with a sharp finger jab, stopping inches from Joe's nose. "You were looking at the coin," Bruce said calmly. "I was looking at you." The dojo was silent. Joe felt the blood rush to his face. It wasn't shame, but a spark of defiance. He was Joe Louis, the man who had defeated some of the best fighters in the world. And here was a kung fu master, respected as he was, telling him that he wasn't fast enough. "Let's test this," Joe said, taking a karate stance. 1, 2, 3. Bruce nodded, assuming his fluid guard. The moment Joe threw the first punch, something strange happened. It wasn't just Bruce's speed that surprised him, but his lack of movement. Joe felt the blow pass millimeters from his face, while Bruce's counterattack, a precise side kick, stopped just a hair's breadth away from his rib. "You moved before I finished," Bruce said. "This is waste." Joe stepped back, taking a deep breath. He knew he had been overcome, but he wasn't the type to give up. Again. They traded blows for several minutes, and with each attempt, Joe realized that it wasn't just Bruce's speed that defeated him, but his efficiency. Every movement was calculated, without wasting energy. Joe, no matter how fast he was always a fraction of a second late. In the end, exhausted, Joe dropped his hands. "How do you do that?" Bruce smiled, relaxing his posture. "It's not about being faster. It's about being smarter." He picked up the coin again and placed it in Joe's palm. "Speed is an illusion. What matters is what you do with it." Joe held the coin, feeling the weight of the lesson. It was not a defeat, but a revelation. And for the first time in a long time, he understood that there was much more to learn than just striking first. The weight of the coin. The following days were of silence and reflection. Joe trained alone in the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, repeating the same movements until his muscles burned. But now, instead of just focusing on strength, he observed every step, every breath, every angle of attack. The coin Bruce had given him remained in his jacket pocket, a constant reminder that the fight was not just about speed, but about intent. Meanwhile, in the city, tensions were growing. A rival gang, the Iron Dogs, had begun raiding territories controlled by Joe's faction. These weren't just street fights, they were calculated ambushes, attacks at times when Joe's men were most vulnerable. Someone was passing information. And Joe knew that if he didn't find out who, everything he had fought for would fall apart. One night, while walking along the docks, Joe sees a familiar figure leaning against a lamppost. Bruce, with his hands in his pockets, watched the movement of the boats as if waiting for someone. "You knew they were coming," Joe said, stopping beside him. Bruce didn't turn around. "I knew someone was cheating. I didn't know who." "And why didn't you tell me?" "Because you needed to learn to see for yourself." He finally looked at Joe, his dark eyes reflecting the distant lights. The coin wasn't just about speed. It was about understanding that sometimes the enemy is not in front of you. Joe clenched his fists. Then tell me who it is. Bruce sighed. It's not that simple. The leader of the Iron Dogs is someone you know. Someone who was once by your side. Before Joe could respond, a whistle cut through the air. Two men emerged from the shadows, knives drawn. Bruce moved first, dodging a blow with a precise spin, while Joe blocked the second attacker with his forearm, feeling the impact reverberate up to his shoulder. There was no time to think, only react. The fight was quick and brutal. Bruce disarmed his opponent with one fluid movement, while Joe, using what he had learned, anticipated the next attack and knocked the man down with a kick to the ribs. When the two intruders were on the ground, panting, Bruce approached one of them and pulled a leather badge from inside his jacket. Police, Joe muttered, recognizing the symbol. It's not just the Iron Dogs who want you out of the way, Bruce said. Someone paid them to take you out of the picture. Joe felt the weight of betrayal like a stone in his stomach. Who? Bruce didn't respond right away. Instead, he pointed to the other side of the pier, where a tall, thin figure was watching the scene with a cold smile. It was Marcus, his right-hand man, the man who had fought at his side in dozens of battles. He's always been ambitious, Bruce said. And now he's found a way to get rid of you and take everything. Joe didn't hesitate. He left the police to Bruce and advanced towards Marcus, who didn't back down, just adjusted his posture, ready to fight. You sold us out, Joe growled. Marcus shrugged. Business. You were weak. It always was. They clashed in the middle of the pier, blows exchanged with a ferocity that went beyond technique. Joe felt the blood pounding in his temples, but now he wasn't just fighting with strength, he was fighting with purpose. Every movement was a response, an anticipation. Marcus was fast, but Joe was no longer the same. In the end, it was a miscalculation. Marcus attempted a high blow, leaving his flank exposed. Joe dodged and counterattacked with a punch to the stomach, followed by a knee to the chin. Marcus staggered, falling to his knees on the damp wood of the pier. You're no better than me, Joe said, panting. Just more desperate. Marcus spat blood onto the floor. They will hunt you down. You have no more allies. Joe looked at Bruce, who was silently observing the scene, and then at the men who had tried to kill him. I have enough. The last move. In the days that followed, Joe reorganized what was left of his faction. Not with violence, but with strategy. He expelled the traitors, negotiated with those who still had loyalty, and when the Iron Dogs tried one last attack, they were disorganized, without leadership. The battle was short. Marcus disappeared. Some said he had fled to the south. Others, that he was dead. Joe didn't care. What mattered was that, for the first time, he wasn't just fighting to survive, he was fighting for something bigger. One night, while walking along the empty docks, Joe found Bruce sitting in the same spot as before, as if he had never left. You won, Bruce said. It wasn't a victory. It was a lesson. Bruce smiled, taking another coin out of his pocket. And what did you learn? Joe picked up the coin, feeling its familiar weight. That the fight is never just about strength. It's about knowing when to attack, when to retreat, and when to let go. Bruce nodded, as if that was the answer he was expecting. Then you are ready. Ready for what? For whatever comes next. Joe put the coin away and looked at the horizon, where the city lights blended into the darkness. I didn't know what the future held. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. And that was enough. The weight of choices. The following days were strangely calm. Joe returned to work at the port, but something about him had changed. He was no longer the same man who let himself be consumed by anger, who saw every challenge as a battle to be won at any cost. Now he observed things with a different clarity, as if he finally saw beyond his own hand. But the world didn't stop to wait for him to adjust. A week later, while unloading crates from a merchant ship, a man in an impeccable suit and cold eyes approached. It was Vincent Morello, a name that made even the toughest people on the pier lower their voices. Owner of half of the city's dirty businesses, he was not someone who appeared by chance. "Joe Callahan," he said, as if the name were a verdict. "I heard about you." Joe didn't stop work. "I don't care what you heard." Vincent smiled, as if the answer was exactly what he expected. "Bruce spoke highly of you. He said it has potential." "Bruce talks too much. Or maybe he knows how to recognize talent." Vincent took a cigar out of his pocket, lighting it calmly. "I need a man like you. Someone who isn't afraid to get their hands dirty, but who also knows when not to get them dirty." Joe finally stopped, staring at him. "I don't work for people like you." "People like me," Vincent repeated, letting out a puff of smoke. "You don't even know what I do." "I know enough." Vincent laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Bruce said you were smart. But cleverness without opportunity is just another form of poverty." He threw an envelope on the floor between them. "Think about it." Joe didn't move. "I don't need it." "Everyone needs something, Joe. Even you." Vincent turned his back, but stopped before walking away. "When you change your mind, you know where to find me." The envelope sat there, untouched, until Joe kicked it away with his foot. But Vincent's words had already lodged themselves in his mind. That night, Joe went to his usual bar, but didn't drink. He sat in the corner, watching the other men drown their frustrations in alcohol, while he tried to understand what he was feeling. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was something deeper, as if a door had opened and he didn't know if he should go through it. It was then that she entered. Lena. He hadn't seen her in years, not since she left town with a man who had promised worlds and funds, but who, in the end, had only given her a son and a life of solitude. She was thinner, with deep circles under her eyes, but her eyes still had that sparkle that Joe had never forgotten. "I heard you're still around," she said, sitting down next to him without asking permission. "And I heard you came back. Things didn't turn out as I expected." Joe didn't ask what that meant. It didn't need to. "And the boy?" "With my mother." She hesitated. "I need money, Joe." He knew what that meant. Lena never asked for help. If he was there, it was because he had nowhere else to go. "How much?" "Enough to get out of town." Again. Joe looked at his hands, calloused, marked by years of struggle. He thought about Vincent's envelope, still on the port floor, untouched. He thought about Bruce, about the coin, about the lesson he had learned. "I can give you the money," he said finally. "But it's not free." Lena frowned. "What do you want?" "May you never come back." She opened her mouth to protest, but something in his face stopped her. Maybe it was the hardness in his eyes. Maybe it was the certainty that, this time, Joe wasn't bluffing. "Okay," she murmured. Joe went to the cashier, took a sum out of his pocket, money he had saved for something he never knew what it was, and placed it in her hand. Lena looked at the notes as if they were poison. "Thank you," she said, without conviction. "Don't thank me. Just go." She got up, but before leaving, she stopped. "You were always a good man, Joe. Even when I didn't want to be." He didn't respond. He stayed there, alone, until the bar closed. The next morning, Joe returned to port. Vincent's envelope was still on the floor, now damp and crumpled. He picked it up, tore it in half and threw it into the sea. Bruce found him there, watching the waves. "I heard you turned down Vincent's offer." "You heard right. This will cost you." "It has already cost me more than I could pay." Bruce nodded, as if he understood. "And now?" Joe took a deep breath. "Now I'm leaving." "Where to?" "I don't know. But it's not from here." Bruce took another coin out of his pocket and held it out. For luck. Joe looked at it but didn't pick it up. Save it. Maybe someone needs it more than me. And with that, he turned and walked towards the train station, without looking back. The city would be left behind. The struggles, the choices, the ghosts. He didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was choosing his own path. And that, finally, was freedom. The train to nowhere. The ticket Joe bought had no destination. Only one direction, west. The train left with a hoarse whistle, dragging itself out of the station as if carrying the weight of all the decisions that had led it there. He settled into the corner of the last booth, near the dirty window, and watched the city dissolve into smoke and distance. He took nothing but his worn-out coat and a rusty revolver, wrapped in cloth at the bottom of the suitcase. The gun wasn't for protection, it was a reminder. Of a man he had killed years before, in an alley behind a bar in New Orleans. That man's face still appeared in her dreams, sometimes smiling, sometimes bleeding, but always asking, "Do you think this will save you?" Joe never knew how to answer. The train swayed, and the passengers around were silent shadows. An old man with a felt hat was dozing, a woman with a child on her lap hummed softly, a seller of miracle medicines tried to convince a couple that his potion could cure everything from hangovers to tuberculosis. Joe closed his eyes and let the rhythm of the wheels on the tracks rock him. But sleep didn't come. Instead, Vincent came. Joe saw him as soon as he opened his eyes, sitting on the bench in front of him, as if he had always been there. The impeccable suit, the sharp smile, the fingers intertwined on the knee. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" Vincent tilted his head, as if he were genuinely curious. Joe didn't move. "I didn't think it would be easy. I just thought it was possible." Vincent laughed, a dry sound like dry leaves being stepped on. Joe, you've always been a romantic. Think you can just leave town and leave everything behind?" He leaned forward, his dark eyes shining. "Debts have no borders. The men you deceived, the men you killed, they don't forget. I didn't deceive anyone." Joe's voice was calm, but his hands tightened on the fabric of his coat. "And as for the dead, they are already buried." "Not all." Vincent took a cigar out of his pocket and lit it with a silver lighter. Smoke snaked between them. "The brother of the guy you killed in New Orleans, for example. He's alive. And you know where you are." Joe felt the weight of the revolver in the suitcase. "Then let him come." "He will." Vincent took a deep drag. "But not alone. He has friends. And these friends have friends. You know how it works." "I know." "Then why run away?" "Because I don't want to be part of this anymore." Vincent sighed, as if disappointed in a promising student. "You already do. The only difference is that now you are alone." The train lurched, and for a second, Vincent seemed to dissolve into cigar smoke. When the air cleared, he was gone. Joe didn't believe in ghosts. But he believed in men like Vincent. The ghost station. The train stopped in a small town whose name Joe never knew. The signs were out, and the station's only employee, a man with a glass eye and a scar on his chin, barely looked up when he got off. "Last stop," said the man, without emotion. Joe looked around. There was no one else on the platform, just dust and the sharp dawn wind. He headed down the main street, passing a saloon with doors slamming in the wind, a church with broken windows, and a grocery store with a faded sign, "Credit for friends only." Inside the grocery store, an old man with a flour-stained apron eyed him suspiciously. "Do you have a room to rent?" Joe asked. The old man spat on the ground. "It depends. Are you from the law?" "No." "Fugitive?" "No more." The old man studied him for a long moment, then threw a rusty key onto the counter. "Last room at the end of the hall. Bathroom is outside. Coffee is at 6. Joe paid with the last coins he had and climbed the creaking stairs. The room was small, with an iron bed, a chest of drawers and a cracked mirror. He took off his coat and looked at himself in the broken glass. The man staring back at him was no longer the same man who had left the city. His eyes were deeper, his beard unshaven, the scar on his eyebrow, a reminder of a fight in a Chicago bar, whiter than ever. He lay down on the bed and closed his eyes. He slept like the dead. The man who came from the east. He woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. There were no hurried steps, nor furtive ones. They were the steps of someone who knew he was in no hurry. Joe sat up slowly, took the revolver from his suitcase and hid it under his pillow. The door opened without anyone knocking. The man who entered was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark overcoat and a wide-brimmed hat. His face was a mask of scars, one of them ran across his mouth, pulling his upper lip into a permanent, grotesque smile. "Joseph Callahan," the man said, as if proving the name. "Or should I call you Joe?" Joe didn't respond. Just watched. "My name is Elias Varga." The man took off his hat and placed it on the dresser. "Brother of Daniel Varga." Joe felt the weight of the gun under his pillow. "I didn't know he had a brother." "He did." Elias smiled, and the scar distorted his face even more. "And now you know. What do you want?" "Justice." Elias approached the bed, but stopped at a safe distance. Daniel was not a saint. He drank, gambled, owed money. But he didn't deserve to die with a bullet in the back of the head in a dirty alley. "I didn't shoot him in the back of the head." "No. You shot him in the chest. 3 times. Elijah crossed his arms. "But the question is not how he died. It's just that he died. And someone has to pay for it." Joe took a deep breath. "Then kill me." Elias laughed, a guttural, humorless sound. "Ah, Joe, if it was just that, I would have done it already. But it's not just me. Vincent sent a message. He wants you alive. At least for now." "For what?" "To negotiate." Elias took an envelope out of his pocket and threw it on the bed. "He has a proposal." Joe didn't touch the envelope. "I already said no to Vincent." "That was before." Elias turned to the door. "Now you have no choice." He left as quietly as he entered, leaving the door open. Joe waited until he heard the footsteps move away. Then he took the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a single handwritten line. "Come to the old mill outside of town. Alone. Or Elias will kill everyone in this joint before dawn." The mill and the end. Joe arrived at the mill at nightfall. It was a decaying structure, with rotting wooden walls and a partially collapsed roof. The wind howled through the cracks, and the smell of mold and rust was strong. He stopped at the entrance, revolver in hand. "Vincent?" he called. Nobody responded. He entered. Inside, the floor was covered in straw and the remains of torn flour sacks. In the center of the room, a wooden table with 2 chairs. In one of them, Vincent. In the other, Elijah. "Sit down, Joe," Vincent said, indicating the empty chair. Joe didn't move. "I prefer to stand." Vincent sighed. "Always so difficult." He took out a pocket watch and opened it. "You have 5 minutes to decide." "Decide what?" "If you'll work for me again." Vincent closed the watch with a click. "Or if you're going to die here." Joe looked at Elias, who was watching the scene with a crooked smile. Then he turned to Vincent. "What if I say no?" "Then Elias will shoot you." Vincent shrugged. "And then he will burn the mill with your body inside." Joe laughed. It wasn't a laugh of amusement, but of something broken inside him finally letting go. "Do you really think I care?" Vincent frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm already dead." Joe raised the revolver and pointed it at Vincent. The difference is that now I can take you with me. Elias stood up, his hand going to the holstered gun. Vincent raised his hand, stopping him. Joe, his voice was almost soft. You won't shoot. Why? Why are you my friend? Joe shook his head. You were never my friend. You just wanted someone to do the dirty work. And you wanted someone to give you a purpose, as Vincent replied. We use ourselves. That's how it works. No more. Vincent looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. All good. He stood up slowly. But know one thing, if you pull that trigger, it won't just be Elijah after you. It will be everyone. Every man you cheated on, every woman you abandoned, every ghost you tried to leave behind. They will hunt you down. And they won't stop until they find you. Joe kept the gun pointed. Then come. Vincent smiled sadly. Goodbye, Joe. He nodded to Elias, who drew his gun. Joe shot first. The sound echoed through the mill like thunder. Elijah fell backwards, his chest open in a gush of blood. Vincent didn't even move, he just looked at his brother's body with an expression that Joe couldn't decipher. You'll regret it, Vincent said calmly. I already regret a lot of things. Joe reloaded the revolver with steady hands. But not that. Vincent took a step back, hands raised in mock surrender. So this is how it ends? No, Joe pointed the gun at him. This is just the beginning. Vincent smiled, as if he was proud. You were always my favorite. Joe fired again. This time, Vincent fell. The last station. Joe left the mill and walked back to town. There was no rush. There was no one left to chase. There was no one else to run away from. When he arrived at the grocery store, the old man was sitting on the porch, smoking a pipe. He came back early, said the old man, without surprise. Does the train leave tomorrow? At 7. Wherever you want. Joe nodded. I'd like a ticket. The old man spat on the ground. You'll need money. I have. Joe took Vincent's watch out of his pocket and placed it on the table. That should be enough. The old man took the watch, examined it and put it in his pocket. You better go to sleep. The train doesn't wait. Joe went upstairs, entered the room and locked the door. He lay down on the bed and closed his eyes. This time, he slept without dreams. Epilogue: The Man with No Name. The train left the next morning, promptly at 7. Joe was sitting in the same booth as before, near the window, watching the scenery pass by. This time, there was no one by his side. No Vincent, no Elijah, no ghost. Just silence. When the train stopped at a town big enough to have a name, Joe got off. I had no luggage, no destination, no passage. He bought a newspaper, had a coffee at a cafe and walked along the main street, blending in with the crowd. Nobody noticed him. And for the first time in years, it didn't bother him. He was just another man in a world full of them. And that, finally, was peace.